6-year-old Emma Richardson clutched her 3-month-old brother Michael against her chest, sitting beneath a snow-laden pine tree in the heart of Colorado's wilderness. The temperature was dropping fast toward -10 degrees, and she wasn't crying, she was whispering through cracked lips. "Please, don't let him find us, Michael." The forest wasn't supposed to echo with children's voices at this hour. Suddenly, golden eyes gleamed through the darkness between the trees, followed by the soft crunch of massive paws on frozen ground. Emma's breath caught in her throat as a silver-gray wolf emerged from the shadows, larger than any dog she'd ever seen. Behind the wolf, a tall figure in a heavy coat moved with deliberate steps. Emma pressed Michael closer, her small body trembling, not just from cold, but from the terrifying realization that their hiding place had been discovered. "Please, God," she whispered, "send someone good." The wolf stopped 10 feet away, tilted its head, and did something impossible. It lay down in the snow, ears forward, watching her with what looked almost like concern. Who were these strangers? And did Emma just run out of time to save her baby brother? Leave a like and share your thoughts in the comments along with the city you're watching from now. Let's continue with the story. 2 hours earlier, Marcus Mack Thompson had been content with his solitude. At 62, the former National Park Ranger had spent the last decade avoiding human contact in his remote cabin nestled deep in the Colorado Rockies. His weathered face, framed by a silver beard, carried the weight of a man who had seen too much loss. The limp in his left leg, a souvenir from his final ranger mission, served as a constant reminder of why he'd chosen isolation over involvement. Mac's only companion was Luna, a 4-year-old gray wolf he'd rescued as an injured pup. Standing 70 pounds of muscle and intelligence, Luna possessed an uncanny ability to read human emotions, a skill that had made her Mac's perfect partner in avoiding the world. Her silver-gray coat gleamed in the firelight of their cabin, and her amber eyes held a wisdom that seemed almost human. Unlike most wolves, Luna had never howled since losing her pack to hunters 4 years ago. The silence between them had become their shared language of grief. Mac's daughter, Katie, would have been 18 now. The drunk driver who killed her had stolen not just her life, but Mac's faith in protecting those he loved. After Katie's funeral, he'd resigned from the Park Service, sold his house in Denver, and disappeared into the wilderness where mistakes couldn't cost innocent lives. 26 miles away, in a modest rental house on the outskirts of Colorado Springs, Emma Richardson was executing the most important plan of her short life. Her mother, Sarah, lay unconscious on the kitchen floor, blood pooling beneath her head where she'd struck the counter during Dave Mitchell's latest discipline session. But this time was different. Sarah had whispered instructions before losing consciousness. "Take Michael. Run to the mountains. Find help. Don't trust anyone in uniform." Emma, despite being only 6 years old, possessed an intelligence sharpened by necessity. Living with Dave had taught her to read adult moods, to anticipate violence, and to plan escape routes. She'd memorized the hiking trails from the maps in Dave's study, understanding instinctively that survival lay in the wilderness rather than with authorities who might not believe a child's word against a former police detective. Dave Mitchell stood 6'2", with the muscular build of someone who used physical intimidation as a tool. His scarred jaw and cold blue eyes reflected a man whose charm masked something darker. 3 years ago, his wife Rebecca had fled with their daughter, leaving him with abandonment issues that had twisted into an obsession with control. When he'd met Sarah, young, vulnerable, and desperate, he'd seen an opportunity to build the perfect family under his absolute authority. Sarah had endured 18 months of escalating abuse, but when Dave began showing inappropriate interest in Emma, maternal instinct overrode fear. Her escape attempt had failed, leaving her broken on the kitchen floor, but it had given Emma the chance she needed. Now, as Mac and Luna walked their evening patrol through the forest they called home, neither knew that a desperate child was carrying her infant brother through the darkness, searching for salvation in a landscape that could kill them both before dawn. The escape had begun 4 hours earlier, when Dave's police radio crackled with news of a multi-vehicle accident on Highway 24. As a private security consultant, he wasn't required to respond, but his ego demanded he prove his continued relevance to his former colleagues. Sarah had waited 20 agonizing minutes after hearing his truck roar down the driveway before implementing the plan she'd rehearsed in her mind for weeks. Emma had been asleep when Sarah shook her awake, pressing a small backpack into her arms. "Listen carefully, sweetheart," Sarah had whispered, her voice steady despite the fear in her eyes. "We're going on an adventure, but we have to be very quiet." The backpack contained everything Sarah could manage: a baby bottle, formula packets, 2 energy bars, a small flashlight, and the folded map she'd torn from Dave's atlas. The plan was simple in concept, devastating in execution. Sarah would carry Michael while Emma followed the marked trail toward the ranger station 15 miles into the national forest. They would travel at night, rest during the day, and reach help before Dave discovered their absence. Sarah had calculated they had a 12-hour head start before Dave returned from his patrol shift. They'd made it exactly 2 miles before disaster struck. Sarah's head injury from Dave's last beating had been worse than she'd realized. The concussion symptoms she'd been hiding, dizziness, nausea, disorientation, intensified with physical exertion. As they climbed a steep section of trail, her legs simply gave out. She collapsed forward, instinctively twisting to protect Michael, but her head struck a jutting rock with a sickening crack. Emma had knelt beside her mother in the darkness, watching blood pool in the snow. "Mommy! Mommy, wake up!" But Sarah's breathing was shallow, her pulse weak. With the wisdom of a child forced to grow up too fast, Emma understood her mother was dying. Sarah's final conscious moments were spent giving Emma impossible instructions. "Take Michael," she whispered, pressing the baby into Emma's small arms. "Follow the trail marked in red. Don't trust police uniforms. Dave has friends everywhere. Tell them Dave is not Michael's father. Promise me." Emma had promised, though she didn't understand why it mattered. She'd wrapped Michael in Sarah's coat, shouldered the backpack, and began walking deeper into wilderness that could kill them both. For 3 hours, Emma had carried her brother through terrain that challenged experienced hikers. Her small legs ached, her arms burned from Michael's weight, and frostbite was beginning to numb her fingers. The temperature had dropped to -5 degrees, and Michael's breathing was becoming labored in the thin mountain air. When she finally collapsed beneath the pine tree, Emma had been hypothermic and exhausted. Michael hadn't cried in over an hour, a silence that terrified his 6-year-old sister more than Dave's worst rages. She'd pressed her ear to his chest, relieved to hear a heartbeat, then wrapped him in her own jacket despite her body's desperate need for warmth. That's when she'd heard the footsteps approaching through the snow. Mac had been following Luna for 20 minutes, trusting her instincts even as his rational mind questioned the wisdom of leaving their established patrol route. The wolf had suddenly stopped, raised her head to scent the air, then began moving with purpose toward the eastern ridge. Her behavior was unlike anything Mac had observed in their years together, protective rather than cautious, urgent rather than methodical. When Luna finally stopped and lay down in the snow, Mac understood why. The small figure huddled beneath the tree looked more like a bundle of discarded clothing than a living child. His ranger training kicked in immediately. Hypothermia protocol, assess breathing, check for injuries. But it was Luna's behavior that convinced him this wasn't a simple lost hiker scenario. The wolf positioned herself between Mac and the children, not aggressively, but protectively. She whined softly, a sound Mac had never heard from her, then moved closer to the little girl and began sharing her body heat. It was unprecedented behavior for a wolf with no pack experience, yet Luna seemed to instinctively understand these children needed protection. Emma's eyes fluttered open as Mac lifted her, Michael still clutched in her arms. "Please don't hurt my baby brother," she whispered through cracked lips. The words hit Mac like a physical blow, the same plea Katie might have made in her final moments. "Nobody's gonna hurt anybody, sweetheart," Mac replied, his voice gentler than he'd heard it in years. "We're going to get you warm and safe." As they walked toward his cabin, Luna padding silently beside them, Emma looked up at Mac with eyes far too old for her face. "Are you one of the good men, mister?" The question would haunt Mac for days to come, because in that moment he realized he'd forgotten how to be good at all. But perhaps with Luna's help and this brave little girl's trust, he might remember. Mac's cabin felt like stepping into another world after the brutal cold of the Colorado wilderness. Built from local pine logs and reinforced with the practical efficiency of a former ranger, it was designed for solitude rather than comfort. But as Mac carried the children through the heavy oak door, the space seemed to transform around Luna's unprecedented behavior. The wolf had never shown protective instincts toward humans before, yet she immediately positioned herself beside the old leather couch where Mac laid Emma and Michael. Luna's amber eyes remained fixed on the children, while Mac moved with the swift precision of someone trained in emergency medicine. He cranked up the wood-burning stove, grabbed wool blankets from his bedroom, and began the careful process of treating hypothermia. "What's your name, sweetheart?" Mac asked gently as he wrapped Emma in layers of warm fabric. Her lips were blue, her small fingers white with frostbite, but her eyes remained alert and watchful. "Emma Richardson," she whispered, never loosening her grip on Michael. "This is my baby brother. His name is Michael." The way she said it, with such fierce protectiveness, reminded Mac painfully of how Katie used to introduce her stuffed animals, as if proper introductions could keep them safe from harm. Mac examined Michael with growing concern. The infant was dangerously dehydrated, his breathing shallow, his skin pale and cold. Using supplies from his extensive first aid kit, Mac fashioned a makeshift formula from powdered milk and warm water. The baby latched onto the improvised bottle with desperate hunger, and Mac felt his first moment of relief since finding them. "Emma, can you tell me how you got out here?" Mac asked carefully, settling into his chair beside the couch. Luna moved closer to the children, her massive head resting near Emma's feet in an unmistakably protective gesture. The story that emerged over the next hour was more horrifying than Mac's worst nightmares about what could happen to vulnerable families. Emma spoke with the matter-of-fact tone of a child who had normalized the abnormal, describing Dave's escalating control and violence as if reporting the weather. "Dave gets angry when Mommy talks back," Emma explained, unconsciously touching a fading bruise on her arm. "He says he's teaching her how to be a good wife. And he says I'm going to be his real daughter when I'm older, not just his stepdaughter." The innocent way she repeated Dave's grooming language made Mac's blood run cold. "Where is your mommy now, Emma?" She fell down and hit her head. There was lots of blood. Emma's voice remained steady, but Mac saw tears forming in her eyes. "She told me to take Michael and find help. She said not to trust people in uniforms because Dave has friends everywhere." Mac's ranger experience had exposed him to domestic violence cases, but nothing had prepared him for the systematic psychological manipulation Emma described. Dave Mitchell wasn't just an abusive partner. He was a predator who had isolated Sarah completely from any support system while grooming her 6-year-old daughter. While Emma continued her story, Luna did something extraordinary. The wolf moved to where Michael lay, bundled in blankets, gently sniffing the baby before lying down beside him. Her body heat and steady breathing seemed to calm the infant immediately. Mac had studied wolf behavior for decades, but this maternal instinct toward human children defied everything he understood about Luna's psychology. "She likes Michael," Emma observed with a small smile, the first Mac had seen from her. "Is she really a wolf? She's the most beautiful animal I've ever seen." "Her name is Luna," Mac said. "I found her when she was just a pup, about the same age as Michael. She's been my family ever since." The word surprised him. He'd never articulated that relationship before, but watching Luna with the children made it undeniably true. As the children warmed up and the immediate medical crisis passed, Mac faced a decision that would change all their lives. His first instinct was to call the authorities, but Emma's warning about Dave's connections in law enforcement gave him pause. More troubling was Emma's next revelation. "Dave put tracking things in my toys," she said quietly, pulling a worn, stuffed rabbit from her backpack. "He said it was to keep me safe, but I think it was so he could always find me." Luna's behavior around the rabbit was immediate and alarming. The wolf growled low in her throat, backing away from the toy with her hackles raised. Mac had never seen Luna react to an inanimate object with such obvious distress, but her instincts had saved his life more than once during their years together. Using his survival knife, Mac carefully cut open the rabbit's belly. Hidden within the stuffing was a small GPS tracking device, still blinking with an active signal. The implications hit him like a physical blow. Dave knew exactly where they were. "Emma, how many of your things have these tracking devices?" The little girl thought carefully. "My rabbit, my backpack, and my special necklace that Dave gave me for my birthday." She touched a small silver locket around her neck. "He said it was so he could always find me if I got lost." Mac removed and disabled all three devices, but the damage was done. Dave Mitchell, with his police training and resources, would already be mobilizing to retrieve what he considered his property. Mac estimated they had perhaps 6 hours before Dave's arrival, maybe less if he had been monitoring the signals actively. The ethical ranger in Mac knew he should contact Child Protective Services immediately, but the father in him, the part that had failed to protect Katie, recognized that bureaucracy moves slowly while predators moved fast. Emma and Michael needed protection now, not after a lengthy investigation that might return them to their abuser. Mac made a phone call to his former colleague, Sheriff Patricia Williams, the one law enforcement officer he trusted completely. Pat had worked domestic violence cases for 20 years and understood the complexities of protecting victims from abusers with institutional connections. "Pat, it's Mac Thompson. I need help with a situation." He explained the circumstances in careful detail, watching Emma play gently with Michael while Luna stood guard nearby. "Jesus, Mac." Pat's voice was grim. "Dave Mitchell has been on my radar for months. We've had 3 domestic violence complaints against him in the past year, but the victims always recanted their statements. If what this little girl is telling you is true, he's not just an abuser, he's a serial predator." "What do you need from me?" Mac asked. "Keep them safe until I can get federal involvement. With the tracking devices and the interstate nature of this case, we can bring in resources that Mitchell can't intimidate or corrupt. But Mac, be very careful. If he's as dangerous as I think, he won't hesitate to eliminate witnesses." As Mac hung up the phone, Emma looked at him with those 2 old eyes. "Is the bad man coming for us?" Mac knelt beside the couch, meeting her gaze honestly. "Maybe. But Luna and I won't let him hurt you or Michael. That's a promise." For the first time in 10 years, Marcus Thompson had a family to protect again. And this time, he wouldn't fail. Dawn broke gray and ominous over the Rocky Mountains, and Mac knew their sanctuary was about to become a battleground. He'd spent the sleepless night transforming his peaceful retreat into a defensive position, using skills he'd hoped never to need again. Luna had remained vigilant throughout the night, her ears constantly rotating to track sounds beyond human perception. The wolf's anxiety was palpable. She knew predators were coming. Emma woke to find Mac checking his hunting rifle at the kitchen table. Despite everything she'd endured, the sight of the weapon in the hands of someone she was learning to trust didn't frighten her. Instead, she asked the question that broke Mac's heart. "Is that to keep the bad man away from Michael and me?" "Yes, sweetheart. But I hope we won't need it." Mac's voice carried more confidence than he felt. Dave Mitchell had military-grade training, backup resources, and the desperation of a man who'd lost control of his victims. Mac had home field advantage, Luna's loyalty, and a fierce determination not to fail another child. Over breakfast, the first hot meal Emma had eaten in days, she revealed more about their life with Dave. Her matter-of-fact descriptions of psychological manipulation made Mac realize they were dealing with a sophisticated predator, not merely an impulsive abuser. "Dave has cameras in all the rooms except the bathroom," Emma explained while feeding Michael his bottle. "He watches the recordings every night to make sure Mommy and I followed all his rules. If we broke any rules, we didn't get dinner." She paused, adding with heartbreaking pragmatism, "I got pretty good at not breaking rules." "What kind of rules?" Mac asked gently. "Mommy had to ask permission to leave the house, even to get groceries. I had to ask permission to play outside. We couldn't talk to neighbors without Dave listening. And we had to call him sir when he was upset about something." Emma's small hand found Luna's fur, and the wolf leaned into her touch. "The worst rule was that I wasn't allowed to cry when he made Mommy sad. Crying made him angrier." Mac's military training had exposed him to interrogation techniques and psychological warfare, but hearing them described through a child's perspective was devastating. Dave hadn't just isolated Sarah, he'd systematically broken down her decision-making abilities while grooming Emma for future abuse. Luna's sudden alertness interrupted Mac's dark thoughts. The wolf's entire body went rigid, her nose pointing toward the eastern approach to the cabin. Someone was out there, moving carefully but not carefully enough to fool Luna's supernatural hearing. Mac positioned Emma and Michael in the reinforced back bedroom he'd prepared, complete with emergency supplies and a concealed exit route. "Remember what we practiced?" he told Emma. "If anything happens to me, you take Michael through that window and follow the marked trail to the ranger station. Don't stop for anything, don't look back, and don't trust anyone except Sheriff Pat Williams." Emma nodded solemnly, though Mac could see the fear she was trying to hide. At 6 years old, she'd already shouldered more responsibility than most adults could handle. The thought of placing even more burden on her small shoulders was agonizing, but Mac had learned that underestimating Emma's capabilities was a mistake. The first sign of invasion came not as gunfire or forced entry, but as a voice amplified through a megaphone. "This is David Mitchell, private security consultant working with Child Protective Services. I'm here to retrieve 2 missing children who were unlawfully taken from their legal guardian." Mac's blood chilled at the sophisticated manipulation. Dave was establishing a public narrative that painted Mac as the kidnapper and himself as the concerned parent. Anyone overhearing would believe Dave was the legitimate authority figure conducting a legal rescue operation. "I know you're in there, Thompson," Dave's voice continued, now without the megaphone's official pretense. "You're harboring my family and I want them back. Come out with your hands visible, and nobody gets hurt." Through his scope, Mac counted at least 4 figures positioned around his cabin. Dave had brought enough firepower to overwhelm a single defender, but he'd underestimated 2 crucial factors: Luna's abilities and Mac's intimate knowledge of the surrounding terrain. Luna was no longer the domesticated wolf who'd shared Mac's quiet evenings by the fire. The approaching threat had awakened something primal in her. The alpha instincts that had made her species apex predators for millennia. Her lips curled back to reveal formidable canine teeth, and a low growl rumbled in her chest like distant thunder. The first confrontation came when one of Dave's men attempted to approach the cabin's back entrance. Luna exploded from the undergrowth with shocking speed, her 70 pounds of muscle and fury colliding with the intruder before he could raise his weapon. The man's screams echoed through the forest as Luna's jaws clamped down on his forearm, not to kill but to neutralize the threat with surgical precision. Mac used the distraction to reposition, firing warning shots that sent the remaining attackers scrambling for cover. His message was clear. Approaching this cabin would cost more than Dave had anticipated. "That's quite a guard dog you have there, Thompson," Dave called out, his voice tight with controlled rage. "But I've dealt with aggressive animals before. Ask yourself if that wolf is worth dying for." "She's family," Mac shouted back. Something you wouldn't understand. The standoff stretched through the morning, with Dave's team probing for weaknesses while Mac and Luna maintained their defensive positions. Emma remained hidden with Michael, following Mac's instructions to stay silent no matter what she heard outside. But Mac could see the strain in her young face. She'd lived with Dave's threats long enough to know he always followed through on his promises of violence. Sheriff Pat Williams arrived with federal backup just as Dave was preparing for a final assault on the cabin. The sight of legitimate law enforcement vehicles racing up the mountain road changed the entire dynamic of the confrontation. Dave's carefully constructed narrative of legal authority crumbled when faced with actual federal agents who'd been briefing on his true identity. "David Markham," Agent Rodriguez announced through his own megaphone, "you're under federal investigation for interstate kidnapping, human trafficking, and multiple counts of domestic violence. Surrender immediately." The revelation of Dave's real name sent shockwaves through Mac's understanding of the situation. This wasn't just a custody dispute or domestic violence case. They'd stumbled into the investigation of a serial predator whose crimes stretched across multiple states. Dave's response was swift and desperate. Rather than surrender, he made one final attempt to reach the cabin and claim Emma and Michael as human shields. Luna intercepted him halfway across the clearing, and the confrontation that followed would be talked about in law enforcement circles for years to come. The wolf's attack wasn't the mindless savagery of a wild animal, but the calculated precision of a trained protector. She targeted Dave's weapon hand first, then his legs, systematically dismantling his ability to threaten her adopted family. Dave's police training had prepared him for human adversaries, not for 70 pounds of intelligent fury that moved like liquid lightning. Mac reached the scene as Luna stood over Dave's prone form, her jaws inches from his throat, but exercising the restraint that separated domesticated wolves from their wild cousins. Dave was alive but thoroughly defeated, his weapon scattered beyond reach, his authority shattered by the simple truth that he'd never been the alpha predator he'd imagined himself to be. "It's over," Mac told Luna quietly, and the wolf immediately stepped away from Dave, returning to her position as protector rather than avenger. Agent Rodriguez's investigation revealed the true scope of Dave's crimes. Using his law enforcement connections and security consulting business, he'd systematically targeted vulnerable single mothers across 4 states. His pattern was always the same: present himself as a protector and provider, isolate the women from support networks, then gradually assume complete control over their lives and children. Sarah Richardson was his 9th known victim. The other 8 families had simply vanished from their communities, with Dave's police contacts helping to cover up missing person reports as voluntary relocations. The federal investigation had been tracking him for 2 years, always staying one step behind until Emma's brave escape provided the evidence they needed. Emma emerged from the cabin when the danger passed, carrying Michael and walking with the dignity of someone far older than her 6 years. She looked at Dave being loaded into a federal transport vehicle and said simply, "He can't hurt Mommy anymore." There was no triumph in her voice, just the quiet satisfaction of a little girl who'd finally found safety. Luna's behavior around Emma and Michael continued to amaze the federal agents and animal control officers who responded to the scene. The wolf showed no aggression toward law enforcement but maintained her protective position near the children, as if she understood that her job wasn't finished until they were truly safe. Mac found himself facing questions he'd never expected to answer. Federal agents wanted to understand how a domesticated wolf had demonstrated such sophisticated protective behaviors. Child psychologists were amazed by Emma's resilience and intelligence, and Sheriff Pat Williams was recommending Mac for commendation for his role in breaking up an interstate trafficking ring. But Mac's attention remained focused on Emma and Michael, who would need more protection and healing than any law enforcement agency could provide. As Dave's transport vehicle disappeared down the mountain road, Mac realized his role in this story was just beginning. These children had trusted him with their lives, and that trust came with responsibilities that would reshape his carefully constructed solitude. Emma looked up at Mac with those wise old eyes. "Can we stay with you and Luna until Mommy gets better?" she asked. "I think Michael likes it here, and I feel safe." Mac knelt down to meet her gaze. "Sweetheart, you and Michael can stay as long as you need. This is your home now." Luna settled beside them both, her amber eyes reflecting something Mac had never seen before: contentment. For the first time since losing her pack, Luna had found her purpose. And for the first time since losing Katie, Mac had found his family. The hospital room in Colorado Springs felt sterile and cold compared to Mac's warm cabin, but it was where Sarah Richardson was finally waking up after 3 days in a medically induced coma. Her brain injury from the fall had been severe, requiring emergency surgery to relieve pressure from internal bleeding. When her eyes fluttered open and focused on Emma's face, the reunion nearly broke Mac's heart all over again. "My babies," Sarah whispered, her voice hoarse from the breathing tube that had been removed just hours earlier. Her hand trembled as she reached out to touch Emma's cheek, then turned to look at Michael sleeping peacefully in Mac's arms. I thought I'd never see you again." Emma climbed carefully onto the hospital bed, mindful of her mother's bandages and IV lines. "We're okay, Mommy. Grandpa Mac and Luna saved us. They kept us safe from Dave." The way she said Grandpa Mac with such natural affection made Mac's throat tighten with emotion. "Doctor." Rebecca Martinez, the neurosurgeon who had operated on Sarah, explained the extent of her injuries with gentle professionalism. "You have a severe traumatic brain injury, Sarah. The good news is that cognitive function appears to be intact, but recovery will take months. You'll need physical therapy, occupational therapy, and ongoing neurological monitoring." The financial implications were staggering. Sarah had no insurance. Dave had controlled all aspects of their lives, including health care decisions. Her medical bills would exceed $200,000, money she simply didn't have. Mac listened to the social worker discuss payment plans and charity care applications, then quietly asked to speak with the hospital's financial administrator. "I'll cover her medical expenses," Mac told the startled administrator. His retirement savings from 30 years as a national park ranger, combined with his military pension and the sale of investment properties he'd bought years earlier, could handle the immediate costs. Sarah was part of his family now, and family took care of each other. The legal complexities were equally daunting. Agent Rodriguez met with them in Sarah's hospital room to explain the federal investigation's findings about Dave's criminal network. "David Markham has been operating under multiple identities for over a decade," Rodriguez explained. "He's wanted in connection with the disappearances of 8 families across 4 states. Your testimony and Emma's will be crucial in prosecuting him." The thought of putting Emma through a trial was agonizing, but the little girl surprised everyone with her mature response. "I want to tell people what he did," Emma said firmly. Maybe it will help other kids like me." Her courage reminded Mac of Katie's fearless spirit, and he felt a surge of protective pride. Sarah's recovery progressed slowly but steadily over the following weeks. Mac rented an apartment in Colorado Springs to be near the hospital, bringing Emma and Michael to visit their mother daily. Luna waited patiently in the parking lot during these visits, somehow understanding that hospitals weren't places for wolves, even domesticated ones. Emma flourished under Mac's care. For the first time in her young life, she was free to be a 6-year-old child instead of a miniature adult shouldering impossible responsibilities. Mac enrolled her in a local elementary school, where teachers were amazed by her intelligence and emotional maturity. Her reading level was far above grade level, but she struggled with basic social skills. She'd never learned to play with other children. Luna's bond with the children deepened during Sarah's hospitalization. The wolf had somehow appointed herself as Michael's primary guardian, sleeping beside his crib at night and alerting Mac to the baby's needs before he even cried. Her protective instincts extended to Emma as well. Luna walked the little girl to the school bus stop each morning and was waiting when she returned home. The controversy surrounding Luna's presence in their lives intensified when local media picked up the story. Animal rights activists argued that keeping a wolf in a domestic setting was dangerous and unethical. Wildlife experts debated Luna's unprecedented behavior, with some claiming it was impossible for a wolf to show such specific protective instincts toward human children. Dr. Amanda Foster, a renowned animal behaviorist from Colorado State University, came to observe Luna's interactions with the family. What she witnessed challenged decades of accepted wisdom about wolf psychology. "Luna's behavior is extraordinary," Dr. Foster told Mac after spending a week studying the wolf. "She's essentially adopted these children as her pack, but she's showing maternal behaviors that are typically only seen in breeding females. It's scientifically fascinating." The media attention brought unwanted scrutiny from Colorado parks and wildlife. Technically, Luna's presence in Mac's home violated state regulations about keeping wild animals. The bureaucratic battle that followed nearly tore their fragile family apart, just as they were beginning to heal. Sarah, still recovering but determined to protect her children, hired an attorney to fight for Luna's right to remain with the family. "That wolf saved my children's lives," she told the packed courtroom during the custody hearing. "She's not a wild animal, she's a family member who's proven her loyalty and love beyond any doubt." The judge's decision was unprecedented in Colorado legal history. Based on expert testimony about Luna's unique psychology, the family's extraordinary circumstances, and the clear evidence of the wolf's beneficial impact on the children's recovery from trauma, Luna was granted special status as a therapy animal. The ruling established legal precedent for keeping domesticated wolves under specific circumstances. But Dave Mitchell wasn't finished destroying their lives, even from his federal holding cell. His attorney filed a motion claiming that Dave's parental rights to Michael had never been legally terminated. The legal argument was technically sound. Dave had been in a relationship with Sarah when Michael was conceived, and his name appeared on the birth certificate as the father. The paternity battle that followed revealed Dave's most sophisticated manipulation yet. DNA tests proved that Dave was indeed Michael's biological father, having deliberately impregnated Sarah as part of his control strategy. His legal team argued that his federal charges were unrelated to his parental rights, and that the children belonged with their father regardless of his criminal activities. Mac watched Sarah's face crumble as she realized the full extent of Dave's planning. "He calculated everything," she whispered to Mac during a break in the legal proceedings. "Even getting me pregnant was part of his plan to make sure I could never leave him." Emma understood the implications better than any 6-year-old should have to. "He's not Michael's real daddy," she told Mac with fierce determination. "Real daddies don't hurt their families. You're more of a daddy than he ever was." Her words gave Mac the strength to fight a legal battle he'd never expected to wage. The custody hearing became a media sensation, with child welfare advocates on one side and fathers' rights groups on the other. Dave's supporters argued that his criminal charges were separate from his parental rights, while Sarah's advocates maintained that a child's safety superseded biological connections. Dr. Elizabeth Chen, a child psychologist specializing in trauma recovery, testified about the severe psychological damage that returning Michael to Dave's custody would cause. This infant has bonded with Mr. Thompson and Luna as his primary caregivers, Dr. Chen explained to the court. Separating him from this stable, loving environment would constitute continued abuse. Luna's presence in the courtroom became a powerful symbol of the unconventional family they'd created. The wolf remained calm and protective, positioning herself between the children and Dave's legal team. When Michael began crying during testimony, Luna's gentle whine immediately soothed him, a response that wasn't lost on the judge or jury. The turning point came when Agent Rodriguez revealed previously classified information about Dave's other victims. Mr. Markham's pattern includes using biological paternity as a legal weapon to maintain control over his victims, Rodriguez testified. In 3 previous cases, children were returned to his custody based on parental rights claims, only to disappear from the system entirely. The implication was chilling. Dave's other biological children were likely dead, murdered when they became inconvenient to his criminal operations. The revelation shifted the entire legal landscape in Sarah's favor, as the court recognized that Dave's parental rights claims were not about love or family, but about maintaining power over his victims. But Dave had one final card to play. On the night before the custody decision was to be announced, federal marshals discovered that he had escaped from his holding facility with help from corrupted guards. The manhunt that followed sent Mac's family back into hiding, knowing that Dave would stop at nothing to reclaim what he considered his property. Luna's behavior changed immediately when she sensed the renewed threat. The wolf's protective instincts shifted into high alert, and she refused to let Emma or Michael out of her sight. Mac realized that their legal victory meant nothing if Dave was free to hunt them down, and that the real battle for their family's safety was just beginning. As they packed emergency supplies and prepared to disappear into the wilderness that had originally brought them together, Mac looked at Sarah, Emma, Michael, and Luna, his chosen family, and made a silent promise. Dave Mitchell had terrorized them for the last time. Whatever it took, Mac would protect them, and this time he wouldn't fail. The news of Dave's escape reached them at 11:47 p.m. through Sheriff Pat Williams' encrypted radio call. Mac had been sitting by the fireplace in their temporary safe house, watching Emma teach Luna a new hand signal, when Pat's voice crackled through the static. "Mac, he's out. 3 guards dead, 2 more in critical condition. He's coming for them." The safe house, a remote cabin owned by the Federal Witness Protection Program, had seemed impenetrable just hours earlier. Located 30 miles deeper into the Colorado wilderness than Mac's original home, it was surrounded by motion sensors, staffed with armed federal agents, and equipped with emergency communication systems. But Dave Mitchell had proven that walls and guards meant nothing to a man with nothing left to lose. Sarah's face went white as Mac relayed Pat's message. Her hands trembled as she reached for Michael, who was sleeping peacefully in his portable crib. "How is this possible?" she whispered. He was in maximum security federal custody. Agent Rodriguez's voice was grim when he called with the details. Markham had help from inside the facility. 2 guards were on his payroll, and he had detailed blueprints of the holding facility. This was planned long before his arrest. The implication was terrifying. Dave's criminal network was more sophisticated than anyone had realized, with tentacles reaching into the very institutions meant to stop him. Luna sensed the danger before any human security system could detect it. The wolf began pacing the cabin's perimeter, her amber eyes fixed on the darkness beyond the windows. Her hackles remained raised, and she emitted low, continuous growls that made Mac's skin crawl. Luna had never been wrong about approaching threats. Emma, who had been learning to be a normal 6-year-old for the first time in her life, immediately reverted to the hyper-vigilant survival mode that had kept her alive in Dave's house. She positioned herself between Michael's crib and the cabin's main entrance, her small hands clenched into fists. "He's coming, isn't he?" she asked Mac with devastating clarity. "Maybe," Mac replied honestly. He'd learned that Emma responded better to truth than to false reassurances. "But this time, we're ready for him." The federal agents assigned to protect them began implementing emergency protocols, but Mac could see the fear in their eyes. Dave Mitchell had killed 3 trained federal officers during his escape, using tactics that suggested military-grade combat experience nobody had known he possessed. These agents were prepared to protect a family from conventional threats, not from a predator who had spent years planning for exactly this scenario. By 2 a.m., the first signs of Dave's approach became unmistakable. The motion sensors began triggering in a pattern that suggested someone was systematically disabling them. The backup generators suddenly failed, plunging the safe house into darkness that only Luna's enhanced senses could penetrate. Most ominously, the encrypted communication systems went silent one by one, cutting them off from outside help. Sarah held Michael against her chest, tears streaming down her face as she realized they were truly trapped. Her head injury still caused dizzy spells and headaches, leaving her unable to fight or flee effectively. She looked at Mac with desperate eyes. "If something happens to me, promise you'll protect my children." "Nothing's going to happen to you," Mac replied. But even as he spoke the words, he was calculating odds that grew worse by the minute. Dave had superior numbers, better equipment, and the advantage of having planned this assault for months. Mac had his ranger training, Luna's loyalty, and a fierce determination not to lose another family. Emma approached Mac with the solemn dignity that still broke his heart. "Grandpa Mac, I need to tell you something important." She pulled him aside, speaking in whispers so Sarah couldn't hear. "Dave isn't just mean. He's sick in his head. He told me once that if he couldn't have us, he'd make sure nobody else could either." The implication hit Mac like a physical blow. Dave wasn't planning to recapture his family. He was planning to eliminate them rather than lose control permanently. This wasn't a custody dispute or even a criminal manhunt. It was a murder-suicide mission by a man who preferred destroying what he loved to losing it. Agent Rodriguez made a final radio transmission before their communications were cut entirely. "Multiple hostiles approaching from 3 directions. We're outnumbered 4-1. If we don't make contact within 2 hours, assume we've been compromised." Luna's behavior became increasingly agitated as Dave's team closed in. The wolf moved between the humans with frantic energy, clearly sensing multiple threats that her pack couldn't escape. Her protective instincts were at war with her survival instincts, and Mac could see the internal struggle playing out in her amber eyes. The first explosion shattered the safe house's reinforced windows at 2:47 a.m. Dave's team had brought military-grade explosives, turning their sanctuary into a death trap in seconds. Mac grabbed Emma while Sarah clutched Michael, and they followed Luna toward the cabin's back exit as debris rained down around them. The second explosion brought down part of the roof, trapping Agent Martinez under a fallen beam. Mac could hear the agent's screams for help, but Luna was already pulling them toward the emergency exit with desperate urgency. The choice was agonizing, save the agent or save the children, but Luna's instincts were correct. They had seconds before the entire structure collapsed. They emerged into the freezing mountain night just as the cabin erupted in flames behind them. The heat seared their backs as they ran toward the tree line, Mac carrying Emma while Sarah stumbled along with Michael. Luna ranged ahead, scouting for threats with the efficiency of a military reconnaissance specialist. Dave's voice echoed through the darkness, amplified by a portable speaker system. "You can't run forever, Sarah. Those children belong to me. Emma belongs to me. And when I catch you, I'm going to make sure you understand the consequences of trying to leave me." The psychological warfare continued as they fled deeper into the wilderness. Dave broadcasted recordings of Emma's voice from when she lived in his house, terrified pleas for forgiveness after breaking his rules, desperate promises to be good. Hearing her own childhood trauma weaponized against them was devastating for Emma, who collapsed to her knees in the snow. "That's not who I am anymore," Emma whispered to Mac through chattering teeth. "That scared little girl, she's gone. Dave can't hurt her anymore because she doesn't exist." But Mac could see the toll that Dave's psychological assault was taking. Emma was 6 years old, no matter how mature trauma had forced her to become. Sarah was still recovering from brain surgery. Michael was an infant who needed warmth and shelter to survive. And they were being hunted through sub-zero mountain terrain by a predator who knew these woods almost as well as Mac did. Luna pressed against Mac's leg, and he could feel her trembling, not from cold, but from the overwhelming responsibility of protecting her adopted pack against impossible odds. The wolf was prepared to die fighting, but even her loyalty and courage might not be enough against Dave's superior firepower and tactical advantages. As dawn approached and their strength began to fail, Mac realized they were facing the darkest hour of their ordeal. Dave had found them, cornered them, and was systematically eliminating their options for escape. The family that had found each other through tragedy was about to be destroyed by the same evil they'd fought so hard to overcome. The dawn that broke over the Colorado Rockies on that March morning would forever be etched in Mac's memory as the moment when hope returned from the darkest depths of despair. They had been running for 6 hours through terrain that challenged even Mac's decades of wilderness experience, leaving a trail that Dave's team could follow with deadly precision. Sarah was weakening from her head injury, stumbling frequently in the snow. Michael's cries had grown weaker as hypothermia began to claim his tiny body. Emma, despite her extraordinary courage, was reaching the limits of what a 6-year-old could endure. Luna had been their salvation throughout the night, using her superior senses to guide them around Dave's ambush points and warn them of approaching danger. But even the wolf was showing signs of exhaustion, her tongue hanging out despite the freezing temperatures. Mac calculated they had perhaps another hour before they would be forced to make a final stand with no advantages except Luna's fierce loyalty. That's when the first helicopter appeared on the horizon. Mac initially feared it was another of Dave's resources. His criminal network had proven to have access to military-grade equipment and corrupted law enforcement contacts. But Luna's reaction was different this time. Instead of the aggressive alertness she showed to threats, the wolf's ears perked forward with what looked almost like recognition. Her tail, which had remained low and cautious all night, rose slightly. The helicopter bore the distinctive markings of the FBI's hostage rescue team, and Mac felt his first surge of genuine hope in hours. Sheriff Pat Williams's voice crackled through the aircraft's external speakers. "Mac, if you can hear this, we're here to extract you. Dave Mitchell is surrounded and cut off from escape routes." The rescue operation that unfolded over the next 30 minutes was a masterpiece of federal law enforcement coordination. Agent Rodriguez, who had survived the safe house explosion with severe burns, had managed to transmit their location before losing communication. The FBI had mobilized their elite tactical teams, bringing overwhelming force to bear against Dave's small but deadly group. But Dave Mitchell had one final card to play, and it nearly cost them everything. As the rescue helicopters moved into position, Dave emerged from concealment just 50 yards from where Mac's family was sheltered. He was alone now. His associates either captured or killed during the federal assault, but he carried enough explosives to eliminate everyone within a 100-foot radius. His appearance was shocking. Burns covered half his face from the safe house explosion. His clothing was torn and bloody, and his eyes held the manic intensity of a man who had crossed the final line into complete madness. "Sarah!" Dave shouted, his voice echoing off the mountain peaks. "You made me kill federal agents. You made me destroy everything I built. The only way this ends is with us together, the way it was supposed to be." The standoff that followed would be studied in FBI tactical training for years to come. Dave held a dead man's switch connected to enough C4 explosive to level half the mountainside. Federal snipers had clear shots, but any sudden movement would trigger the device. The hostage rescue team was effectively neutralized by Dave's willingness to commit suicide rather than lose control of his victims. Sarah, despite her injuries and exhaustion, found the strength to stand and face her tormentor one final time. "You were never my family, Dave. You were my prison. But these people, Mac, Emma, Michael, even Luna, they showed me what real love looks like. You can't understand that because you're not capable of love. You only know how to possess and destroy." Dave's response was a roar of frustrated rage that echoed across the mountains. "I gave you everything. I protected you. I was going to give Emma the father she never had. And you threw it all away for this crazy old man and his wild animal." Emma, who had been silent throughout the confrontation, stepped forward with the fearless dignity that had sustained her through months of abuse. At 6 years old, she faced down the monster who had terrorized her family and spoke words that would haunt Dave Mitchell until his dying day. "You're not my daddy. You never were. Daddies don't hurt their little girls. Daddies don't make their wives cry. Grandpa Mac showed me what real daddies do. They protect people instead of scaring them." The psychological impact of Emma's rejection was devastating to Dave's fractured psyche. His entire self-image was built on the belief that he was a protector and provider, not a predator. Hearing his victim articulate the truth about his nature with such clarity and conviction shattered the last remnants of his carefully constructed delusions. In that moment of psychological collapse, Dave made a critical error. His grip on the dead man's switch relaxed for just a fraction of a second, long enough for Luna to act on instincts that had been building throughout the confrontation. The wolf's attack was not the random aggression of a wild animal, but the calculated precision of a trained protector who had been waiting for exactly the right moment. Luna's 70 pounds of muscle and fury struck Dave's center mass, driving him backward into the snow while simultaneously knocking the explosive device from his hand. The C4 detonated harmlessly against a rock outcropping, the blast contained by the mountain's natural geography. FBI snipers didn't need to fire. Luna's attack had accomplished what an entire tactical team couldn't. She had neutralized the threat without triggering the explosive device. Dave Mitchell lay motionless in the snow, his body broken by the impact, but his eyes still burning with impotent rage. Agent Rodriguez, despite his injuries from the safe house explosion, was among the first to reach them. "It's over," he told Mac, as federal medics began treating Sarah's hypothermia and checking Michael's vital signs. "Dave's network has been completely dismantled. We found evidence of 17 families he'd victimized over the past 12 years. You've helped us close cases that have been cold for years." The scope of Dave's criminal empire was staggering when the full investigation concluded. He had operated across 6 states using different identities and corrupted law enforcement contacts to avoid detection. His victims ranged in age from infants to elderly women, all chosen for their vulnerability and isolation. The evidence recovered from his various properties led to the discovery of burial sites containing the remains of victims who had tried to escape or who had simply become inconvenient to his operations. Emma's testimony, delivered with remarkable poise for a 6-year-old, became the cornerstone of the federal prosecution. Her detailed accounts of Dave's psychological manipulation techniques helped establish patterns of behavior that connected him to dozens of unsolved cases. Child advocacy organizations would later cite her courage as an inspiration for other young victims to come forward. Luna's role in the rescue operation sparked a national conversation about the bond between humans and animals. Video footage of the wolf's attack on Dave, broadcast on news networks worldwide, showed her acting with surgical precision to protect her adopted family. Animal behaviorists called it unprecedented evidence of interspecies loyalty and protective instinct. Dr. Amanda Foster, who had studied Luna's behavior before the escape, testified before Congress about the therapeutic benefits of human-animal bonds in trauma recovery. Luna didn't just save this family's lives, Dr. Foster explained to the packed hearing room. She demonstrated that healing from trauma requires more than medical treatment or legal justice. It requires the kind of unconditional loyalty and protection that transcends species boundaries. But the most profound transformation was in Mac himself. The man who had spent 10 years hiding from human contact to avoid the pain of potential loss had discovered that love always involves risk, and that the risk is what makes it precious. As he watched Emma play gently with Luna while Sarah nursed Michael back to health, Mac realized that Katie's death hadn't taught him to avoid loving others. It had prepared him to love more deeply when the right family found him. The legal proceedings that followed Dave's capture were swift and decisive. Federal prosecutors had overwhelming evidence, multiple victims willing to testify, and a defendant whose criminal network had been thoroughly documented. Dave Mitchell was sentenced to life imprisonment without the possibility of parole, ensuring he would never again terrorize vulnerable families. More importantly for Mac's family, the court proceedings established legal precedent for their unconventional household. Luna was officially designated as a therapy animal essential to the children's psychological recovery. Mac was granted full custody rights as Emma and Michael's adoptive father, with Sarah maintaining her parental rights while acknowledging Mac as co-parent and head of household. As the courtroom emptied after the final sentencing hearing, Emma tugged on Mac's sleeve. "Grandpa Mac, are we really safe now? Is the bad man never coming back?" Mac knelt down to meet her gaze, Luna settling beside them both. "Yes, sweetheart, you're safe now. We're all safe, and we're going home together." The word home had taken on new meaning for all of them. It wasn't just a place. It was the people, and even the animals, who chose to protect each other against whatever darkness the world might bring. 3 months after Dave Mitchell's sentencing, Mac's cabin had been transformed from a hermit's retreat into something he'd never imagined possible, a home filled with the sounds of family life. The morning sun streamed through windows that Sarah had adorned with cheerful curtains, casting warm light across the living room where Emma was teaching 2-year-old Michael to stack wooden blocks, while Luna watched protectively from her favorite spot by the fireplace. The physical changes to the cabin were extensive but necessary. Mac had added a second bedroom for the children, expanded the kitchen to accommodate family meals, and installed a proper heating system to replace his solitary wood stove. But the emotional changes ran far deeper. The silence that had once defined his existence had been replaced by Emma's laughter, Michael's babbling, Sarah's gentle humming while she worked, and Luna's contented sighs as she dozed in patches of sunlight. Emma had blossomed into the bright, curious child she was always meant to be. Now 7 years old, she attended the local elementary school where teachers marveled at her intelligence and resilience. Her reading level was years above her age group, but more importantly, she was finally learning to play and make friends like a normal child. The hypervigilance that had kept her alive during Dave's abuse was slowly fading, replaced by the confident security of a little girl who knew she was unconditionally loved and protected. "Grandpa Mac, can you help me with my school project?" Emma asked one evening, spreading papers across the kitchen table. "We have to write about our family, and I want to make sure I explain about Luna correctly." Her assignment would go on to win first place in the county's elementary school writing contest, a heartfelt essay titled, "My Family Has 4 People and 1 Wolf." Michael's development had been remarkable under the loving care of his unconventional family. The infant who had nearly died from hypothermia in the Colorado wilderness was now a healthy, happy toddler who considered Luna to be his personal guardian and playmate. His first word hadn't been "mama" or "dada." It had been "woof," his attempt to communicate with Luna in her own language. The wolf's patience with the active toddler was extraordinary. She allowed him to pull her ears, use her as a pillow, and even share her food without ever showing the slightest irritation. Sarah's recovery had been both physical and emotional. The traumatic brain injury from her fall had healed completely, leaving her with only occasional headaches that served as reminders of how close they'd all come to losing each other. More importantly, her emotional wounds were healing under Mac's patient care and the security of their mountain home. She'd resumed her work as a graphic designer, now specializing in illustrations for children's books, a career change inspired by Emma's love of reading and Luna's starring role in many bedtime stories. The legal resolution of their situation had established important precedents for other families in similar circumstances. Luna's official designation as a therapy animal had opened doors for other trauma survivors to receive animal-assisted therapy. The Luna Law, as advocates called it, made it easier for courts to recognize the therapeutic value of human-animal bonds when making custody and housing decisions. Mac's transformation was perhaps the most profound of all. The man who had spent 10 years believing he was too dangerous to love and protect others had discovered that his ranger training and military experience weren't curses. They were gifts that enabled him to provide the security his new family needed. He'd started a small wilderness survival school, teaching other families the skills that had saved their lives during those terrifying days of pursuit. Dr. Foster's ongoing research on Luna's behavior had attracted international attention from animal behaviorists and child psychologists. The wolf's ability to distinguish between protective aggression and nurturing care, her sophisticated understanding of human emotional states, and her apparent capacity for what could only be described as love, had challenged fundamental assumptions about animal intelligence and interspecies bonding. Luna represents something we're only beginning to understand about the emotional complexity of animals, Dr. Foster explained during a lecture at Colorado State University. Her bond with this family isn't just instinctual pack behavior. It's a conscious choice to love and protect beings who aren't of her own species. It's teaching us that the capacity for love might be more universal than we ever imagined. The annual Luna Day celebration had become a tradition in their small mountain community. Neighbors who had initially been skeptical of the family's unconventional makeup now gathered each spring to honor the wolf who had saved local children and helped expose a criminal network that had terrorized families across multiple states. Emma always gave a speech during the celebration, her words carrying wisdom far beyond her years. Sheriff Pat Williams, who had become an honorary family member, often stopped by for Sunday dinners. "You know," Pat told Mac one evening as they watched Emma and Michael play with Luna in the yard, "when I first got that call about a crazy old ranger with a pet wolf harboring kidnapped children, I thought it was the strangest case of my career. Turns out it was the most important." The financial security of their unconventional family had been ensured through an unexpected source. The federal government's reward fund for information leading to the capture of major criminals had awarded Mac's family a substantial sum for their role in exposing Dave's trafficking network. More importantly, Sarah had received a settlement from the Federal Bureau of Prisons for the security failures that enabled Dave's escape. The money had allowed them to expand the cabin, secure Luna's future care, and establish college funds for both children. As autumn painted the Rocky Mountains in brilliant colors, Mac found himself sitting on his expanded porch with Sarah, watching Emma teach Michael to throw a ball for Luna. The wolf's patience with the toddler's uncoordinated attempts was infinite, and her gentle retrieval of the ball each time brought squeals of delight from both children. "Do you ever wonder what would have happened if Luna hadn't found them that night?" Sarah asked, her hand finding Mac's. Mac considered the question, watching Emma's face light up with joy as Luna dropped the ball at her feet. "I think Luna knew something I'd forgotten," he said finally. "Family isn't about blood or law or convention. It's about who you choose to protect and who chooses to protect you back." As the sun set behind the mountain peaks, painting the sky in shades of gold and pink, Luna settled between the children for their evening ritual. Emma would read a story aloud while Michael listened with rapt attention, and Luna's amber eyes reflected the wisdom of a creature who had learned that love transcends every boundary humans think they understand. In the end, perhaps that was the most important lesson their extraordinary family had to teach the world. Love comes in many forms, and the most powerful families are built not on similarity, but on the unshakable commitment to protect each other against whatever darkness the world might bring. What this remarkable story teaches us is that family isn't defined by blood, age, or even species. It's defined by the fierce commitment to protect and love unconditionally. Mac Thompson discovered at 62 that his life wasn't over, it was just beginning. After a decade of isolation following his daughter's tragic death, he found purpose again through Emma's courage, Michael's innocence, and Luna's unwavering loyalty. For many of us in our golden years, we may feel our most important chapters are behind us. But Mac's journey proves that love has no expiration date. Sometimes our greatest calling comes when we least expect it, in forms we never imagined. Whether it's opening our hearts to grandchildren who need us, neighbors facing hardship, or even a rescue animal waiting for a second chance, we possess wisdom, experience, and capacity for love that younger generations desperately need. Mac's military training didn't make him dangerous. It made him the protector his chosen family needed. Your life experiences, whether joyful or painful, haven't diminished your value. They've prepared you to be exactly who someone else needs you to be. The question isn't whether you're too old to make a difference, it's whether you're brave enough to love again when love finds you. What unexpected family member has brought the most joy to your later years? Have you ever discovered that your most painful experiences actually prepared you to help someone else in ways you never imagined? Share your stories in the comments below. Your wisdom might be exactly what another reader needs to hear today.